Hey there. So, my next guest, indie game designer and developer who has an absolute passion for wanting to express her story through the use of color. And this is an absolutely interesting concept she has. She kind of walks us through the process of coming up with the game and how they've gone about designing it and developing it and marketing it and promoting it out there. So, if you have any interest in being a developer at all, this was a fantastic one to listen to. I know you're all going to love it. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Gamerpreneur podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Carlton. Today, I have a very special guest with us. I have Ashley Guchhait. Hey there, Ashley. How's it going?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I am fantastic. It is a beautiful sunny day in Las Vegas. How about yourself?
Yeah, it's a little rainy up here, but it's been a great day, so I'm happy about that.
Wonderful. Okay, so Ashley, I don't do a lot of small talk on the show. I like going right into it. So why don't you
Okay,
begin by just telling us a little bit about yourself, please?
sure. Yeah, my name is Ashley Guchhait. I am the game designer and CEO of an indie studio called Boba Studios. We are currently working on our debut game, Squirrely Roo Rabbit, which is a 2.5D puzzle platformer based around color theory. I've wanted to make games my whole life, and I'm super excited about doing it. And yeah, the pandemic's been really interesting because it kind of, goes against the interactive medium, and figure out how to show it has been like, it's been a journey to figure out that. But I think that we've learned a lot of like really valuable things about how to like improve our like work, like the way that we work together remotely, and like the work sessions and everything like that, to make them more efficient. So that's been pretty awesome.
Wonderful. All right, that gives us a lot to talk about. Before we do that, though, I start every interview with a single question. So I'm going to ask you, just like I ask everybody else,
Yeah.
on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high, how weird are you, Ashley?
Ooh. Um, I don't know how to put a number on it. I went to art school, so that's like pretty weird on its own. But I don't know. I feel like I tend to not really think about how weird I am. It's like I'm just having fun. I like to make games for a living, and that's fun. And I guess that's inherently weird. Um, I don't know. People think I come up with like crazy ideas all the time, though. So
All right, good enough for me. Okay, so this is the Gamerpreneur podcast, and I know you are working on an indie game studio and on an indie
yes,
game, but what is your gamer cred? When did you first start playing video games?
I actually can't remember when I first started playing games. I've been able to narrow down that my first game was either Pokemon Stadium or Super Smash Brothers on the Nintendo 64, but I don't actually have a memory of the first time like a video game controller was put into my hands. So I'm not sure. But I've always played games as far as I can remember, and that was a huge part of my childhood.
Okay, so like what kinds of things did you play growing up then?
Um, I played a lot of different things, but I think it's pretty much like the same core that I play now. I play a lot of like Nintendo games like Pokemon, things that are cute. I love simulation games, whether it's like the Sims sort of simulation or Animal Crossing or farming sims. I love strategy games, role playing games, JRPGs. I love games that are like super long and like you have to like grind and play them for like 100 hours. I'm like all about that stuff.
Man, I wish I had the time. um,
Yeah, yeah.
what are you playing today?
What am I currently playing? Oh, I just got I haven't started it yet though. This has been a busy week. I just got the remake of the original Disgaea on the Switch. I loved that game as a kid, and I'm really looking forward to getting back into it. Um, and then more recently, I've been playing a lot of what's that game? Story of Seasons, Friends of Mineral Town. That was also a game that I played as a child. I feel like I've played like every iteration of that game, from when it was like Back to Nature to Friends of Mineral Town to more Friends of Mineral Town. And what's been really, really exciting about this experience is that I didn't like I didn't really have a lot of friends that played Harvest Moon as when I was a kid, and the artist on our team, Kirsten, plays Harvest Moon, and so it was really cool to sit there and be like, "This is a Harvest Moon game that I grew up with and absolutely adored," and she just had never played it before. So we're like actually going through and playing it like day by day together because it like counts, counts the days. There's like a clock in the game, um and so we'll be like, okay, like I'm gonna play like these 5 days, and we'll like do it at the same time. And that's been really fun because it's interesting how they've changed it, but it's also interesting like seeing it from someone else's eyes who's more familiar with like the newer entries in the series.
That's wonderful. I still think Harvest Moon 64 is the greatest of all, but
That is one that I've never played, but I'm interested in playing.
you absolutely have to. It was one of, I think personally, the best of all the Harvest Moon games I've ever played.
Yeah, I've read a lot about the older ones in the series that
Don't make me
I
feel old.
missed, but I think
Don't do that.
I think the oldest one that I have is Back to Nature.
Okay. Let's get over to the preneur part. So when did you decide to start your studio?
So the first time like concrete memory I have where I was like, okay, I am going to grown up and own like a company was when I was 7. So at the time it wasn't like I'm going to own a video game studio. It was like I'm going to have like an entertainment thing that is going to put out video games. But I wanted to do like all sorts of other things, which I still want to. But I wanted to do like, like music and like comics and animated shows and stuff like that too. But so I would say like that's when like I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do with my life. And video games is just like the piece of it that I've decided to start with, which like just by coincidence happens to be like a little bit of all of the other pieces. Like video games, like if it's a story-based game, of course, has writing, and all games have music in them, and all games have art and like all that. So it's been really nice that being the first, the piece that I'm focusing on, because it's just everything that I wanted to do rolled up into one.
Okay, wonderful. Now, now you can give us a little bit of your professional background. How did you end up where you're at today?
So I would say that my journey, it started, I guess, when I was, I don't know. And I definitely, I guess, in a lot of ways started younger than I was going to say. I was going to say high school because that's when I decided I was going to go to art school. But honestly, I think it started earlier than that. I did a lot of like extracurricular stuff as a kid. And I think all of that feeds into like what I do today. Um, whether that was like playing instruments, because that's like a vital part to me understanding music and games, to I have a traditional arts background. I've been doing art as long as I can remember, um and yeah, just like all of like these other things I think kind of just like happen to make my life as a game dev, specifically an indie dev, going to convention and all that stuff, has made that like so much easier and able to like manage all of that. But yeah, in high school was when I decided that I was going to go to art school. And it was a toss up for a little bit. I considered very heavily going to music school, and I also considered going to culinary school. And there was a year or two where I was thinking about um, going just to like do writing, creative writing, um, and like not focus on like that side of arts rather than like visual or like musical. So that would have been like the only case where it wouldn't have been like some form of art school. Um, but I knew that by the time I was a senior that I wanted to go to MICA, the Maryland Institute College of Art. That school really spoke to me. I had a lot of teachers who had gone there, and it was right down the street from Peabody Conservatory, which is where a lot of my music teachers went. So it like felt like a place that I knew, and I had met a lot of like great artists that I really respected from there. And when they had people come to our campus or when I visited, it just felt really welcoming. And the other half of that too is that it's a very academic art school. And of course, I wanted to keep working on my writing, because, story games is all where I'm at. So I wanted to keep working on that. And yeah, so I went there. I met my whole team during my time at MICA. Um, from there, I left and I actually got a job on campus. And I think that's actually like the interesting part of my like professional career around it is I've been so focused on starting my studio. I even made like my thesis project to be half about that. Um, that I've remained very close to campus, and I know a lot of people, and I've actually like most of my jobs have been there. But we entered in a competition and won a grant, and that's like what really was able to kick off our studio, and that's how we established ourselves as an LLC. Um, yeah, and then from there, it's just been working really hard on our games, taking it to shows, being quarantined, and then working really hard on our games and not taking it to shows. And yeah, that's basically where we are today.
Beautiful. Okay. Now, what is the process like of actually going and creating a game? You know, I would say most of my audience is not necessarily game developers, but they love games. So, like, what is this process like? I mean, is it you have an idea and then they just move forward, or how does it work?
So I think there are a few different ways that somebody can approach doing it, but usually the way that we approach it is we often look at if we're making game completely from scratch, right? Like we're not looking at like, oh, we're part of a game jam and they gave us a theme and we have to, make it around that. We usually start by like, what is a game that we want to play, or what is a story that we want to tell? And I think having an answer to either of those questions helps set us on the path. Um, I could talk specifically like what it was like to make Squirrely Roo, the game that we're working on. That has like a little bit more of a concrete track, because you can see that uh, we knew that we wanted it to be a story game, and puzzle games is heavily where our team was interested in. But it started out as our thesis project. And so because of that, I was interested in having double majored, seeing if I could get it to fulfill both of my thesis requirements. The funny thing is, I ended up actually just splitting off and doing two projects, but it would kind of like set up the tone on how we were thinking about making this game. So we knew kind of, we were like, okay, so we want it to be some sort of story. And from there, we were like looking at old games that we had made. And because, at the time, it was a lot of like different prototypes that we had like tested out, but not really like taken to like a really long-term project. Um, so we look back on this mechanic, the color-based mechanic that becomes the core of Squirrely Roo, which was actually in the first game that Kirsten and I had ever made together. And it revolved around like this idea of like identifying, warm and cool colors and interacting with them differently. And so that became like a building block. And then from there, we were like, okay, well, it's going to be a story and it's going to be about colors. And that like filled in this piece of like, oh, well, like watercolored children's illustration books. That's like where you really see this idea of like color being important to story. And that's where we got like the aesthetic of it. So the entire game is designed to look like hand-drawn watercolors, but the world itself is meant to look like a pop-up book, which is where we get like the 2.5D thing. So like the characters are flat, they're like paper doll-esque, but the environment is 3D. But intended to look like paper craft. So I think like this one was like a really unique game because it just so like everything felt like it like connected, with something else that we were thinking of, and it all came together. Um, but I think like that, is kind of like how our process is. It's like we're like thinking about like we knew that we had this goal of like making a story game, and we're like, well, what do we want that to look like? Well, we really like puzzles, and then we thought about like what were we already experienced in, what is something that we can use to like get this moving, and from there like what is the idea that like we want to capture. um and of course then there's like thought into like who's going to be playing this game. And one of the things that we make a point of in our studio is as like a women-led team, we're looking at making products like for audiences like us. So like what are games that like women are going to play, because that's not often looked at in the industry, even though women make up 50% of gamers. So that's like our main audience with the game. And just as we go through the process, making sure like we're staying true to them, we're staying true to ourselves and like what we're making, and that these things are communicating. And that's why we take it out in the world to play test it. That's why we share our games so much. Games are an interactive medium, And it's not like when we sell it and it's done and we ship it, we're not going to go home with people, right? And be like, is our game working? Are we watching it? That can't happen. So we do that now. And so Squirrely Roo, in 2 years, before the pandemic, we took it to about 80 shows. Um, and that usually involves half of the shows, I would say, are 3-day shows. The other half are like 1 day where we like show up, and those are often more like educational geared events, rather than like the 3-day ones tend to be like more, for fun and like, gaming convention. Um, and we get people, we set it up. We try to make our booth look like as welcoming as it can be. Because we're here to play video games. We're not here to like, we personally like don't really want to be gritty. Our game is like pastel and bright colors. So we make our booth pastel and bright. And I don't know about everyone else, but I like playing video games in a comfortable environment. I like sitting on the couch and on my TV. And so that's what we do. We bring an inflatable couch and we blow it up in the convention hall. We have the TVs, and people just come and they hang out with us. And they play our games for a while, and then we talk to them. We get feedback if there's when they find things that could be better. We take notes. We work on it later. If it's a multi-day convention, we have our computers there, of course, because we're running the games. We can edit it that night, bring a new game back the next day. And so yeah, it's an iterative process. So it's a lot of working and reworking and checking with people and being like, does this feel good? How do you feel when you do this? And does that make sense with how like me as the game designer imagined it? Or are they doing something else and maybe I'm not communicating in the right way, and maybe something else could be clear. Yeah, and I'd say that's ultimately like the process of how we make games. And all the while, of course, we work on marketing it. We're a small indie studio. We're a team of 3. So when we are going to launch a game, it's not like something that everyone's going to get pings on from their news outlets or social media or something like that. So we need to build our base while we're working on our game. And so that's like the other really important part of making a game is building your community, and making sure that like the people that you're making the game for, like it's very clear to them that you're listening to them, and that what they say matters, because all of that goes into our game. And that's 100% why our game is able to exist, is because of other people out there playing it. Yeah, I think that's our whole process.
All right, beautiful. It's quite involved then. I have a question. So you said that you're a small team, 3 people, and you met your team back when you were in college. So I'm gonna take it these people are also your friends. I've heard horror stories of people working with their friends. Have you experienced anything like that? But you're at liberty to disclose.
um, well, I would say our current team, as Boba Studios, we work super well together. I mean, you're absolutely right in saying they're my friends, they're my best friends. We like, us working on our game. It's definitely like work time, and we make a point of being like, okay, like this time is work time. This is when we hang out. This is, these are separate. Um, and so like we respect each other as colleagues as we do friends. But I think that if you have friends that you can work with, I find that experience so much more rewarding than working with somebody that you like just kind of know. Because we're always like open with each other, we're always excited to see each other, excited to work with each other. And that's maybe not the common experience of what people think of when they think of I'm going to work. um well, yes, I have experienced that, the bad end of working with friends. And that is a hard thing. I mean, I did other group projects in college that um were with friends that I haven't gone to work on or work together with after. um and it is one of those things that like has the potential to ruin a relationship if you let it. um because it's a lot harder to like look at one of your friends and being like, hey, stop doing that. Like what you're doing, you're not performing at your best. Like this, like whatever your behavior is like not, helping move this project along. And I need you to be serious. It's like really hard to look at somebody and say that. And it is one of those things that like going through that experience can like drag your, respect for them down. Um, and that I think is what ruins a friendship when you don't respect the other person. Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, fortunately, that hasn't been our experience. And I think the number one way to combat that is by having open communication and just letting everybody know, what are my expectations for me? What are my expectations for you? What are my expectations for this project? And we all talk about it. We all know what we want. And if something happens, we can talk about it. And also, I mean, the other piece of that is to talk about it in a respectful way, right? Because you can communicate as openly as you want, but if you're being mean to people, then, that's not going to win either.
Absolutely. All right, that's wonderful. Now, let's talk a little more personally about you, Ashley. Let's hop in a time machine. I want to go back in time, back to when you were 7 years old. We're going to go up. We're going to get to talk to little Ashley way back then, because you said that was when you decided you wanted to start something.
Yeah.
Now, if you could go up to little Ashley back then and you could tell her everything that you know. You impart everything that you've collected over the years, all the good, all the bad, all the ups and downs, all the challenges and trials and the information you've learned and the struggles. And if you could impart everything upon her that so that she could do it bigger, badder, faster, more successful, however you define that. But if there was only one thing that she absolutely had to know, what would that one thing be?
I've thought about this question a lot. And I think, well, for one thing, and this is not really my answer, but kind of, um, I think a lot of our experience with starting up our own game studio and doing indie games is that people have told us like what to do, but not how to do it. Like somebody's like, okay, get out there and show at a convention. And like nobody tells you like what does that look like when you show up? What do you need to take to prepare to be with you? One of the great things about conventions that I really love, they're really, exciting to me and I love that energy. But one of like the things about that is it's like always kind of like, you know, somewhere between like a really great time and putting out a million fires. And you've got to be like super like creative thinking and on your feet and like, how do I resolve this thing? So, like for example, the first time we went, we got a booth at a really big convention. Um, we'd gone and we had quite like a pretty good setup for our first time being at like a big convention because that was after our commencement exhibit and we went all out for that. I mean, we had a bubble tea bar because of our name Boba Studios, like right in the middle of our thing, so people could like drink bubble tea and play games. So we had an idea of like how we wanted things to look like and to put on a good show, but we weren't prepared for things like showing up next, being sandwiched in between two games that have like a budget that's like 5 times the budget that you guys have, and you're like, oh, well, the banner that we printed out for this thing that looked really, big in a gallery, um, is like nothing compared to something else. And so you're like, okay, so we need to get this up. We need to get it up high because if it's up higher, it'll at least stand out more than it does right now. Like we need to make our stand build vertically. So we built this thing that we have lovingly called the Death Trap. And it is no longer used at our conventions. I will say that there was only one casualty with it, and it was a mug. Um, but we took like an art easel and we like taped it to a table that we like stacked on top of something else, and we had like the banner hang up off of that, and we like draped lights around it and then pushed it up like it was like a mast in a sailboat. And it was just like one of those things that, it's not the best solution, but it was a solution for what we could do at the time. um and so I think like, something like that, I would tell another game designer, if you're going to go out and do this thing, you can never be like too prepared for something like this because something will happen that you're not expecting. And, um, it's just about how can you like play the game in the moment, can you put the puzzle together? And so like, I think things like that, are really important because I think there's like we need a greater knowledge share within our industry of like how to do it. It's not just about the final result. It's like every step of the way, like when do I go and get an internship? When do I first start showing at a convention? When is a good time for me to like put out like what kind of marketing is the best kind of marketing to start out with, and like where do you do that? And of course that all depends team by team, but I think that if you are at least aware of those things, you can, be better prepared and therefore like have a better chance of success, or like just, do what you're doing more better. I don't know. Yeah, I would say though, like to me specifically, one something that I think that could have been helpful for me like personally to know um is I think I hear this all the time, or like people worry about this all the time. And I heard this once when I was in college with, people are afraid to put their ideas out there. And I'm afraid to put my ideas out there. I have a game studio and I am like the last person who wants to show my work ever. And yet, like, based on the numbers I was telling you earlier, we show our games like 40 times a year on average. And if they're all like, multiple day shows, that's like countless hours. But I am not the person who likes to show my work. It's really scary to me. Um, and this is not why it's scary to me, but I think this is an important lesson that a lot of people fear. Is that I had this in one of my writing classes, I had this teacher who she was like just, putting out I want to say it was her first or second book. And like we were all talking to her about that experience, and um, how is it that she was like able to like actually like, go the publishing route? What does that look like? And she had said to us that, when you come up with this creative idea and you're really passionate about it, you think about it all the time and you want to talk to people all the time about it. But then you think to yourself, if I talk to people about this, what if someone who's better than me can make it before I can? And and my personal problem stems more from like the idea of like I don't know. I feel like other people can execute things better than I can, and I'm always hard on myself about that. And it's not really like the fear of somebody taking it, but I think that hearing this was still like a huge relief, because I think a lot of like small teams or solo devs and things like that, worry because they know that they're going to have a big timeline ahead of them. Um, and she was like, when you have that, don't worry about what other people are going to think, what they're going to do with it, because they're not. You had that idea because something in your head you sat there and you're like, this is a good idea. But that was like unique to you. And then you became passionate about it. And the likelihood of someone out there that you talk to being exactly passionate about the exact same thing that you are is so unlikely. You're probably sitting there being like, oh, wow, this is the best idea ever. But most likely they're in this, creative industry too. They already have their best idea ever. So like don't start selling yourself short by not showing what you're doing, because they already are doing that with their thing, or they're getting ready to do that with your thing. And like, that's yours. It's your story to tell. It's going to be in the way that you did it, and only you can make that because of that. Um, so just like, try not to worry about what other people are going to think, or what other people are going to do, or can you do it, because um, if it's your idea in your story, you're the only one who can do that story, and you're the only one who can make that game and put it out there in the way that you would. And that's why you should do it. There is really no competition to like you, because you're the only one who's you.
Absolutely. And that is some fantastic advice. Getting a little more personal, if we can. You see, Ashley, I actually believe that we learn the most in our life from our failures, not necessarily our successes. Because when you succeed the first time you try something, you may not know what happened. You're just like, hey, it worked, right? But when you fail, you got to take a look at it. You got to figure out what went wrong. You got to be able to move past it in order to succeed the next time. So I'd like to ask you, what do you consider your biggest failure in life? And what did you learn from it?
That's such a hard question. Like to be able to like, I don't know, make a hierarchy of like what is the biggest thing I have failed at. Like certainly I'm not thinking of it. Um, I will say I think that one story that stands out to me, because I can talk about how I have learned from it, is and actually we've already, I feel like, talked a little bit about how I've learned from it, um is the first time that I had a large exhibition at a museum. um so when I was a junior in college, I signed up for this class because of course I wanted to make more games. Um, and it was a collaboration class with Peabody. And I had been waiting like my whole time at Micah. I've been wanting to take more music classes at Peabody. And it was just really hard to fit in my schedule because there was so much that I wanted to do. So when I saw this class, I signed up for it immediately. And it was, it had like limited spots because it was pulling from both schools and both Peabody and Micah tend to have smaller classes because when you're like working with like that form of instruction, whether it's art or music, you really need more like of your individualized experience. Um, so I took that class and I was like, okay, I'm going to make a music game. And I will say that to clarify, this is like not my first time on a stage because I grew up playing instruments. I was in the school orchestra, and so it's easier when you're in like a group of people. Um, I though when I got more into like my private music, my private tutoring that I got in music, I like really tried to avoid being on stage because I that's not my favorite thing. So I've played solo on stage twice, and then like the rest of the years that I played instruments, I just got out of it. So like this is like I guess probably it's not my first time on a stage, but it was like the first time where I was like the only one. It was one of two of us, and that's like a whole. It's a different sort of spotlight than being like one of the 25 people in an orchestra. Um, so I went to the class and I ended up working with the person who makes music for Boba Studios. That's actually how we met. And this failure actually is, really the thing, and I'll get to it. The thing that makes me go like, we work really well together. Because we spent all semester on making this game. And, of course, as a game designer, I'm like, okay, we need to test it and we need to test it. We need to test it. We need to test it. And so we make this like music based, it's like based on a game show. It's a game, but it's like based around the theme of like a game show. And it's playing like different, folk songs, and like the contestants have to identify like this right part in the music. It's like there are like four different speakers, and then three of them are playing one melody, and then the other one is playing a different one. And you have to find the right one and press the button. We like 3D printed like these buttons. It was fun. And figured out how to like rig up Wii remotes to work with speakers. But we've been testing it and playing it, and there's like rehearsals, and we go to that, and we like had to rent these like giant speakers because we needed four of them. And the Walters Art Gallery like didn't have speakers that we could like move around. They're like integrated with the stage, and like I had to like wheel them down the street, and they're like so heavy. um we did all this stuff for it, and we go to rehearsals, and then like on the day of the concert we get up there to play, and the computer just won't talk to any of the speakers anymore. And honestly, to this day, we don't know why. Um, and we saw it and we were like, okay, we need to get this to work. And so they like moved on with the next performance, and we kept working on it, and we were trying to get it to, get things to talk to each other and get it to work. And this had worked every time we had rehearsed it. Um, but just like this, the day of like the actual performance, and there was only, one day of that. It wasn't like, the conventions. It was just like one show and you had one time slot, and like, my parents had come to see it and everything. Um, and we spent all this time, trying to figure it out, and like everyone else is like doing their performances on the stage. And we're like sitting there like at but the bottom of it, like on the computer, like trying to get these things to connect, like right at like the part where like all of like the sound equipment is. And we actually never get it going. um and like, yeah, like that sucked, honestly. And it's like a different sort of embarrassing than going up on a stage and like not doing a great job, or thinking that you could have done better. And it like almost feels like maybe you didn't do enough, because clearly something didn't go right in the end, but I don't know what that was. And it was the day that I learned the very, very important lesson of technology has stage fright. And if you're ever going to put it on a stage, it's going to go wrong. So just be prepared for that. It's another thing about those conventions, and like the little fires, is that technology like doesn't like to be the center of attention, even though like the bright flashing screen would tell you otherwise. Um, but it was. I honestly, I didn't feel as bad about it as I thought I would, because we tried everything that we could to get it to work, and it didn't. Um, and there was really nothing more that we could do about that. But I think, to me, the really important part of that lesson was that we work together in what is often a high stress situation just for people in general. Like a lot of times people will like work on group projects and they might not go well to begin with. And this one had been going really well. But like the show, a lot of people get stressed out at shows. I mean, I know I'm stressed at shows because I don't like being the center of attention. But but we did the best that we could. And in the end of it, like we didn't blame each other for it. We tried really hard. We worked together, and we were like, you know what? This is just how it is. We'll get it to work another time. We'll make something else. We will show something else again. And this is okay. Um, and then we went to the Cheesecake Factory, and then we had cheesecake. And yeah, and it made me think, like, and like there was no part when we were in that, in those moments where we were sitting there being like, this is your fault. No, this is your fault. I mean, more than, I myself, it would have been easier to blame because I was at the last rehearsal session. TJ hadn't been able to make it because he had to be at another rehearsal that he was also doing. Or I think his was actually, it was a performance that night, because he's our composer. And so he had to, be at his own performance. And so I was at the last rehearsal session. So it would have been really easy for him to be like pointing the finger, like, well, you were the one that was like here last time. So why doesn't it work? What'd you do? And that didn't happen. So I think, like, in that moment, it was like, I think we make a good team. We handled something that was really hard, and we handled it well, and we still like each other. And clearly, because we went and got cheesecake together, like you don't go out to eat with somebody that that you're like mad with or think ruined your performance or your night or something like that. So yeah, I think that ended up being like a really good experience, even though it was like, it's one of those things that when you think about performances, you're like, that's why I don't want to do it, because there's something like, you sit there, or at least I do sometimes, and I'm like, there's something that I can do so badly, and I don't even know what it is yet. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it's going to be so bad, it's going to ruin the entire thing, and it's going to throw it off the rails. And like, you know what? It happened.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing. Now, Ashley, this has been a fantastic interview. How do people find you? Where's your company at online, your website, social media, all that, please?
So you can find us on any of your social media, pretty much. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Facebook, we're at Boba Studios Play. Twitter and Instagram, we're at Boba Studios. Website is bobastudios.net. Um, We're also on Discord. We're making, a community of people who play our games or are interested in our games or anything like that. So you can find us on Discord and come and chat. We are also on SoundCloud, which is where we have the original soundtrack for our game's music. And yeah, I think that's all of our social media.
All right, wonderful. Now, as we wrap this up, do you have any final thoughts you want to share? Anything I didn't ask you think we still need to cover?
I would say the one thing that I can question that I would think would be, not just social media, but how is it that listeners can support us? And of course, as I mentioned, we're a small indie studio. We are funding our games as we can, and doing, like all of it's coming out of pocket right now. We had a grant before, but that had a time limit. So things like, sharing what you see if you're on our social media and something resonates with you, share it out. If you want to try our game, we have free demos on Game Jolt and Itch.io. We love for people to play them. We also love to get feedback, whether that's like you want to personally email us, and our email is on there, or if you want to message us on Game Jolt or Itch.io, and it's on there, and let us know what you think. We also have an Etsy online store, and all of that directly funds the creation of our games. I don't know, anything that you can do if you want to reach out to us, ask us questions, we'd be happy to chat.
All right, wonderful. Now, Ashley, thank you so much for coming on with us today. I
Thank you for
genuinely do
having
appreciate
me.
it.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
love that there is a podcast, that you've made a podcast about video games and entrepreneurs. It's so integral to like what we do, and it's not nearly like recognized or celebrated enough. So
No, it is
thank
not.
you
But
for
thank you
making
very
that.
much. I appreciate that. And for everybody else, I'm going to remind you all, don't be just a gamer, be a gamerpreneur.